Today we're going on a journey full of suspense and danger with 7 horror stories involving deadly hitchhikers. Get ready to hear chilling stories of people who accepted or offered rides and ended up living true nightmares on the road. We're going to explore real and tense cases, showing how a simple act of kindness can turn into a fatal encounter when you least expect it. So, sit back, check that your car doors are locked, and let's begin this chilling journey. Oh, and before some stranger asks you for a ride, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave your like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go. 1. The Roadster. Australia, Outback, summer 2019. The sun beat down on the Stewart Highway, one of the longest and loneliest in the world, cutting through the red desert between Alice Springs and Darwin. For many, crossing that stretch was a challenge of endurance and courage. For Daniel, a 27-year-old British backpacker, it was a dream come true to hitchhike across the country, meeting people and experiencing wild landscapes. What he didn't know was that that trip would become the worst nightmare of his life, entering the Australian police archives as one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded. Daniel had been walking for hours in the scorching heat when a dust-covered blue Volvo truck pulled up beside him. The driver, a stocky middle-aged man with a gray beard and cold eyes, smiled and waved. "Going to Darwin? Hop on, mate," he said in a thick accent. Daniel thanked him, threw his backpack on the truck bed, and climbed into the truck, feeling the relief of the air conditioning and the promise of a few hours of rest. The conversation began in a friendly manner. The driver introduced himself as Mick, a veteran of Australian roads, full of stories about wild animals, accidents, and strange encounters in the desert. Daniel, curious, asked questions and listened attentively, but soon began to notice uncomfortable details. The dashboard of the truck was covered in small objects, bracelets, watches, keychains, even worn stuffed animals. "I'm a collector," Mick explained, without going into details. Daniel laughed, but felt an inexplicable shiver. As the sun set and the landscape became increasingly desolate, Mick began asking personal questions. Where Daniel had come from, where he was going, if he had any family waiting, if anyone knew his route. The tone of the conversation grew colder, and Daniel realized that his cell phone's signal had disappeared miles away. He tried to hide his discomfort, but the tension grew with each passing minute. When they stopped at an isolated gas station to fill up, Daniel took the opportunity to go to the bathroom and text a friend, but there was no signal. In the bathroom, he noticed posters of missing persons, backpackers, tourists, even local drivers. Back at the truck, he saw Mick talking to the attendant, who seemed to avoid eye contact. The mood grew tense. As they got back on the road, Mick locked the truck doors and turned up the radio, drowning out any attempts at conversation. As night fell, Daniel noticed that Mick had left the main route, taking a poorly lit dirt road. "It's a shortcut faster to Darwin," he said, without looking at his passenger. Daniel tried to protest, but Mick ignored him. The truck was moving along a narrow trail, surrounded by bushes and rocks. Fear set in once and for all when Daniel saw, in the rearview mirror, the reflection of something hanging behind the seat, a backpack identical to that of one of the missing people on the poster of the gas station. The truck came to a screeching halt in a clearing. Mick turned off the engine and turned to Daniel, smiling grimly. "We're here. Now, just wait." Daniel tried to open the door, but it was locked. Mick pulled a knife from the glove compartment and calmly began to talk about his collection of souvenirs from travelers who had crossed his path. "No one will miss you here, mate. The desert swallows everything." Desperate, Daniel pretended to faint, waiting for an opportunity to react. Mick got out of the truck to prepare the ground, leaving the knife on the dashboard. Daniel, with his heart racing, managed to unlock the door from the inside and fled towards the woods, hearing the furious screams of the truck driver behind him. The chase was long and harrowing. Daniel ran for miles, cutting his legs in the bushes, listening to the sound of Mick's footsteps and flashlight approaching. In a moment of desperation, he hid under a rock formation, holding his breath as Mick passed within a few feet, cursing and promising that he would find him. When he finally heard the truck start and pull away, Daniel waited more than an hour before emerging from his hiding place. At dawn, exhausted and dehydrated, Daniel walked to a country road, where he was rescued by a couple of farmers. The police were called, and, after an intensive search, found the truck abandoned in another part of the desert. Inside was a macabre collection of belongings from dozens of missing people, as well as notes written by Mick about each passenger. The case shocked Australia and gained international attention. Mick, identified as responsible for a series of disappearances over the years, was never captured. Daniel survived, but never traveled alone again. The story of the road driver became a grim warning to backpackers and travelers. On deserted roads, the real danger may be behind the wheel, just waiting for the next victim. 2. The last stop. Germany, Bavarian countryside, winter 2022. Raphael and Lucas, two Brazilian friends backpacking through Europe, cross small towns and villages in search of authentic and affordable experiences. On that freezing night, after missing the last train, they decided to risk hitchhiking on a secondary road that cut through a region of dense forests and nearly deserted villages. The cold was biting, the loneliness intense, and the road seemed to stretch on forever under the pale light of distant streetlights. After waiting for almost an hour, a black sedan pulled up. Inside, a friendly couple, Klaus, a soft-spoken middle-aged man, and Ingrid, a smiling, attentive-looking woman, offered a ride to the next town. The atmosphere in the car was welcoming. Background music, conversations about travel, tips on tourist attractions. Raphael and Lucas relaxed, grateful for their good fortune, and soon felt at ease, sharing stories and laughing about the hardships of the journey. At one point, Klaus mentioned a shortcut to avoid the traffic on the main highway, promising that they would get there faster. The friends agreed, trusting in German hospitality. The car turned onto an increasingly narrow road, lined with tall, dark trees. The couple's GPS was turned off, and their cell phone signal had disappeared. Raphael began to notice uncomfortable details. The trunk seemed full. There were fresh scratches on the inside of the doors, and Ingrid, who had been talkative, had gone silent, staring at the road. The discomfort increased when they passed an abandoned car on the side of the road, covered in snow and with broken windows. Lucas commented, trying to ease the tension, but Klaus just accelerated, looking away. Further ahead, other abandoned vehicles appeared, some with open doors, others partially covered by branches and leaves. The atmosphere in the car became heavy, and Raphael exchanged apprehensive glances with his friend. When they asked how much further they had to go, Klaus answered evasively, saying that they would soon stop to rest a little. Ingrid suggested that they take the opportunity to stretch their legs, but her tone was forced. The car entered a clearing where there were at least 3 abandoned vehicles, all of different models, some with suitcases and clothes scattered on the ground. The place was surrounded by dense trees, and there was no sign of houses or people nearby. The couple stopped the car and got out, saying they needed to resolve something quickly. Raphael and Lucas, now on high alert, realized that the doors were locked from the inside. They tried to unlock them, but the mechanism seemed tampered with. Outside, Klaus and Ingrid were talking in low voices, glancing frequently at their trapped friends. Ingrid opened the trunk and took out a toolbox, while Klaus walked toward the car with a metal baton. Desperate, Raphael managed to kick open the back window, breaking the glass and quickly getting out, pulling Lucas behind him. The couple screamed, running after them, but the friends ran into the forest without looking back. The cold cut their skin, the branches scratched their arms, but adrenaline kept them moving. At a certain point, they heard the sound of the car's engine moving away, but they didn't know if they were safe. They spent hours lost in the woods, hearing the sounds of footsteps and distant voices. At one point, they found a torn backpack and documents belonging to another missing traveler, confirming that they were not the first to fall into that trap. When day broke, they managed to reach a secondary road, where they were rescued by a truck driver. The police were called and, after an intense search, found the clearing with the abandoned cars and signs of a struggle. Klaus and Ingrid disappeared without a trace, and subsequent investigations linked the location to other unsolved disappearances in the region. The case gained prominence in the German and international press, serving as a warning to travelers and backpackers about the risks of accepting rides from strangers in isolated regions. Raphael and Lucas never hitchhiked again and began sharing their story in lectures and videos, warning other young people about the real dangers of lonely roads. The Last Stop has become one of the most chilling stories in Bavarian police archives, reminding everyone that behind a stranger's friendliness and smile can hide a predator waiting for his next victim, and that on deserted roads, not every ride is a gesture of kindness. 3. The Silent Driver. England, Yorkshire countryside, autumn 2018. Emily, a 21-year-old college student, was returning from a music festival in a rural village. The last bus had already left, and the station was empty, shrouded in fog and silence. With no cell phone signal and the temperature dropping rapidly, Emily decided to accept a ride offered by a quiet man who had stopped his car on the side of the road. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face and sunken eyes, simply nodded when she asked if he could take her to the nearest town. The silence in the car was almost suffocating, broken only by the roar of the engine and the sound of tires on the wet asphalt. At first, Emily tried to make conversation, asking about the area and thanking him for his kindness, but the man answered in monosyllables, looking away and keeping the radio off. The dashboard of the car showed signs of heavy use, and the back seat was full of personal belongings. Women's bags, coats, even a red scarf similar to the one Emily had seen on a missing persons poster at the train station. A chill ran down her spine, but she tried to convince herself that it was just paranoia and that she would soon be safe. The journey continued for a few minutes in tense silence, until Emily realized that the driver had turned off the main road and taken a secondary route. She asked why, but the man replied curtly that it was a shortcut. The landscape became increasingly deserted, with empty fields and isolated houses in the distance. The cell phone signal disappeared completely, and Emily, increasingly nervous, sent a text message to a friend, but received no confirmation of delivery. The man began asking personal questions, asking if she lived alone, if anyone was waiting for her, if she had family in the area. His tone was cold, almost clinical. The car turned onto a dirt road, surrounded by tall trees and branches that hit the windshield. Emily noticed the man speeding up, frequently glancing in the rearview mirror. At one point, he stopped the car in front of an isolated house with boarded-up windows and a rusty iron gate. "We're here," he said, finally breaking the silence. Emily tried to open the door, but it was locked. The man got out of the car, walked around the vehicle, and opened the door on her side, grabbing her arm tightly and leading her inside the house. Inside the house, the atmosphere was oppressive. Old furniture, heavy curtains, a strong, musty smell, and padlocked doors. Emily was taken to a small room, where there was an iron bed with chains attached to the sides and nail marks on the walls. On a shelf, she recognized objects she had seen in the car, as well as other female belongings: wallets, cell phones, jewelry, even diaries. Terror took over when she realized that other victims had been there. The man locked the door and disappeared down the hallway. Emily, in a panic, searched the room and found a small window covered by bars. Using a piece of iron loose from the bed, she began to force the bars open, cutting her hands in the process. She heard footsteps approaching and, desperate, pretended to be unconscious. The man came in, muttering to himself, and approached to check if she was alive. Emily, gathering her strength, hit him with the piece of iron and ran down the hallway, tripping over boxes and furniture. She managed to get out through the back door, running through the woods until she found a secondary road. Barefoot and covered in blood, she was rescued by a farmer who was passing by on a tractor. The police were called, and upon investigating the house, found evidence of other kidnappings: clothes, diaries, photos, and recordings of victims. The man, identified as responsible for disappearances in the region, was arrested days later, hiding in a neighboring house. The case shocked the country and gained international attention, being considered one of the most disturbing crimes in the English countryside. Emily survived, but never accepted rides from strangers again. Her story became a warning in safety campaigns for young people and travelers, showing that behind the silence of a driver, the worst of human predators can hide, and that on deserted roads, danger can be lurking, just waiting for the next victim. In the months that followed, Emily underwent extensive psychological treatment to overcome the trauma. The impact of the case was so great that the local university organized lectures and awareness campaigns on travel safety. The criminal's modus operandi was detailed in news reports and documentaries. He would drive along rural roads, observing vulnerable young people, always choosing times when there were few people and places with no cell phone signal. The victim's belongings were kept as trophies, and the diaries found revealed that he kept cold records of each kidnapping, describing the reactions of fear and despair of his victims. The police were able to identify other missing women whose cases had been shelved due to lack of evidence. The driver's trial was watched nationwide, and her face graced the front pages of newspapers and TV shows. Emily, despite being traumatized, became a symbol of survival and resilience, participating in interviews and collaborating in investigations into disappearances in rural areas. The house where the horrors took place was demolished months later, but locals still avoid the road where it all happened. For Emily, the physical and emotional scars remain, but she found the strength to turn her experience into a warning to other young people. Her story, based on true events, lives on as a grim reminder that, in the solitude of the road, silence could be the harbinger of the worst of human dangers. What's up, guys? The stories of deadly hitchhikers are spine-chilling, aren't they? If you're enjoying these suspenseful stories, take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more spine-chilling content. Now, let's get back to the next stories. There's still a long, dangerous road ahead. 4. One-way trip. Poland, spring 2017. In the midst of the traditional Juvenalia Student Festival, a group of 6 university students, Marta, Piotr, Anya, Tomasz, Carol, and Julia, decided to take advantage of the last night of the event to visit a nearby city, famous for its parties and bars. With the trains crowded and taxis scarce, they accepted an offer of a ride from a white minibus, apparently chartered for students, that was waiting outside the campus. The driver, a middle-aged man with an impassive face and few words, simply checked their student IDs before allowing them to board. At first, the mood was euphoric. The friends laughed, shared videos of the festival, and planned their evening. The minibus, clean and quiet, had closed curtains and low music playing. As they drove along the road, Marta noticed that the driver was not following the usual route to the neighboring town. The GPS on her phone showed that they were heading off-route, entering a poorly lit rural area. Piotr tried to make conversation, but the driver limited himself to curt answers, looking away in the rearview mirror. Tensions rose when they realized the doors were locked from the inside. Tomasz tried to open a window, but they were all electronically locked. The group exchanged nervous glances, and Julia, the most anxious, began to sweat. The driver, sensing the mood, turned up the music, drowning out their conversations. Anya tried to call the police, but there was no cell phone signal in that area. The minibus passed through dim villages and dirt roads, where not a single living soul was in sight. At one point, Carol noticed that the driver was making brief stops in dark areas, talking quickly to hooded men who emerged from the bushes. The group realized that something was very wrong. Marta tried to calm her friends down, but the tension was unbearable. The smell of gasoline and sweat inside the vehicle was intensifying, and the feeling of claustrophobia was growing by the minute. Panic set in as the minibus pulled into a clearing surrounded by tall trees. The driver turned off the engine and slowly turned toward the group, locking the doors with a button on the dashboard. "Get down slowly," he ordered, his voice now firm and threatening. Outside, other men waited, armed with flashlights and iron bars. The students were forced out, one by one, under threats and shouts. On the ground in the clearing were backpacks, clothes, and cell phones belonging to other young people. Traces of struggle and bloodstains indicated that the area had been the scene of other attacks. Piotr tried to fight back, but was quickly restrained. The attackers searched the students, confiscating their belongings and documents, while the driver watched in silence. Julia, in despair, managed to break free and run into the woods, being chased by one of the men. Meanwhile, Marta and Anya hid behind a fallen tree trunk, using the darkness to their advantage. They managed to send a distress message using the only remaining cell phone with a battery before being found and dragged back to the group. Their terror reached its peak when they heard gunshots and screams coming from the forest. The driver, now without a mask of cordiality, revealed that the minibus was used to capture young people at parties and festivals, handing them over to a gang that profited from extortion and disappearances. Hours later, the police, alerted by Marta's message, arrived at the clearing. The criminals had fled, taking some students hostage. Tomasz and Carol were found tied up, in a state of shock, while Julia and Anya were rescued from the forest, injured but alive. Marta, who had disappeared, became a symbol of the case, which gained national and international attention. The investigation revealed that the minibus traveled around different university cities, always during major events, changing license plates and drivers to avoid suspicion. Reports of similar disappearances emerged at other festivals, and the gang was never fully dismantled. The case served as a warning to students and young travelers, reinforcing the importance of never accepting rides from strangers, even in apparently safe situations. The one-way trip remains in the Polish police archives as one of the most mysterious and cruel crimes of the decade, reminding everyone that behind a simple invitation for a ride can hide the worst of dangers, and that on party nights, the last ride can be the scariest of all. The trauma experienced by the survivors was profound. Julia, who managed to hide in the forest, spent months in psychological treatment, suffering from nightmares and panic attacks. Tomasz and Carol, released by the police, never went to college parties again. Anya, scarred physically and emotionally, became an activist for student safety at public events, participating in awareness campaigns, and giving lectures at universities across the country. Marta's disappearance was widely publicized, and her family never gave up searching for her, keeping alive the hope of one day finding her again. The press covered every detail of the case, and documentaries were produced to warn about the dangers of illegal rides and the vulnerability of young people at large events. The gang's modus operandi was detailed in investigations. They used unmarked vehicles, approached dispersed groups, and took advantage of the chaos of the festivals to act without arousing suspicion. The clearing where everything happened was closed off, but residents of the region report, to this day, hearing screams and seeing strange lights at night. The case, widely believed to be based on real events, remains a grim warning to students and travelers. Even on the most exciting nights, danger can lurk, waiting for just one opportunity to turn euphoria into terror. The white minibus, a symbol of hope for those seeking a ride, has become the emblem of a nightmare that will never be forgotten. 5. The Stranger in the App. New York City, fall 2023. After a lively party at a Brooklyn apartment, 24-year-old Anna decided to ride home using a ride-sharing app. It was almost 2 a.m., and the streets were quiet, lit only by streetlights and the headlights of the few passing cars. The night was chilly, and the biting wind made Anna pull her coat tighter around her, anxious to get there safely. Anna requested a ride through the app, and within minutes, a black car pulled up on the corner. The driver, a middle-aged man with a face partially covered by stubble and piercing eyes, greeted her with a discreet smile. Anna got into the car, feeling a mix of relief and tiredness, but also a slight apprehension that she couldn't explain. At first, the trip seemed uneventful. The driver asked about the party, and Anna responded with tired smiles, trying to keep the conversation light. But as the car moved forward, it began to deviate from its usual route, turning onto increasingly deserted and poorly lit streets. Anna noticed that the app's GPS showed a different route than the one the driver was taking, but she hesitated to question him, fearing she would seem paranoid. The silence in the car grew heavy. The driver then began asking personal questions, initially subtle ones, about where Anna worked, who she lived with, and whether she had a boyfriend. Anna answered cautiously, trying to keep the conversation superficial, but the driver's tone changed, and he began revealing intimate details about Anna's life. Things she had never told anyone, like the name of her best friend, her work address, and even details of a recent fight with her family. Fear took hold of Anna. She tried to call someone, but her cell phone signal was weak and the messages wouldn't go through. The driver, noticing her nervousness, smiled sinisterly and said he knew everything because he had been watching her for weeks, studying her habits and routines from the places she frequented to the time she left the house. Anna tried to remain calm, feigning interest and trying to find an opportunity to escape. When the car stopped in a dark alley, the driver turned off the engine and turned to her with a menacing look. Anna, desperate, opened the door and ran out into the street, screaming for help, her heart beating fast and tears streaming down her face. A local resident heard the screams and called the police. The driver fled before authorities arrived, but Anna was able to provide enough details for him to be identified as a criminal wanted for stalking and invasion of privacy, with a history of harassing and threatening multiple victims in the city. The case shocked the city and gained national attention, serving as a warning about the hidden dangers of ride-sharing apps. Despite the trauma, Anna became an active voice in safety campaigns for ride-sharing users, warning about the importance of always being vigilant, sharing your route with people you trust, and never accepting route deviations without question. The story, based on real events, shows that even in seemingly common situations, danger can be closer than you think, and that surveillance and control can hide behind a simple click on your cell phone. Anna never used ride-hailing apps alone again, and her experience has served to save other people from similar situations. In the following months, Anna underwent long psychological treatments to overcome the trauma. The impact of the case was so great that the local university organized lectures and awareness campaigns on travel safety. The criminal's modus operandi was detailed in news reports and documentaries. He traveled through urban and rural areas, observing vulnerable young people, always choosing times when there were few people and places with no cell phone signal. The victim's belongings were kept as trophies, and the diaries found revealed that he kept cold records of each kidnapping, describing the reactions of fear and despair of his victims. The police were able to identify other missing women whose cases had been shelved due to lack of evidence. The driver's trial was watched nationwide, and her face graced the front pages of newspapers and TV shows. Despite being traumatized, Anna became a symbol of survival and resilience, participating in interviews and collaborating in investigations into disappearances in urban and rural areas. The house where the horrors took place was demolished months later, but locals still avoid the road where it all happened. For Anna, the physical and emotional scars remain, but she found the strength to turn her experience into a warning to other young people. Her story, based on real events, remains a grim reminder that in the solitude of the roads and the apparent safety of apps, silence can be the harbinger of the worst of human dangers. Additionally, reports from neighbors and locals continue to emerge, speaking of strange lights and shadows appearing near the road where the driver was last seen. Some claim to hear sounds of engines and footsteps during the night, adding to the mystery and fear in the area. Security and criminology experts have analyzed the case, highlighting the importance of being alert to signs of suspicious behavior in ride-hailing drivers and the need for stricter measures to protect users. Anna's story has inspired changes in security policies and driver screening protocols in several cities. For Anna, the experience changed her life forever, leaving deep scars but also the determination to help others avoid the same fate. Her voice echoes as a constant warning, reminding us that, even in a connected world, danger can be hidden behind the screen of a cell phone, ready to attack when least expected. 6. The Black Car. France, Auvergne region, winter 2022. A snowstorm was raging on the country roads, making the scene even more bleak and dangerous. Pierre, a 34-year-old man, was trying to return home from a work meeting in Clermont-Ferrand. His car had broken down at dusk, and his cell phone, with no signal, was useless in the biting wind and rapidly accumulating snow. Walking along the side of the road, Pierre felt the cold seep through his coat and his already numb feet, while darkness seemed to swallow everything around him. After walking for almost an hour, a black car with no license plates appeared out of the fog and stopped next to him. The driver, a man with a neutral expression, a scruffy beard and cold eyes, offered him a ride to the next town. Pierre hesitated, but desperation and the intense cold convinced him. He got into the vehicle, feeling the heat from the heater and a metallic smell in the air, mixed with something slightly sweet like cheap perfume. The dashboard was clean, but the back seat caught his attention. There was a bloody coat, a torn backpack, and a dark cloth partially hidden under the seat. The trip began in silence, with the radio off and the driver focused on the road. Pierre tried to make conversation, asking about the storm and the driver's destination, but received only monosyllabic answers. His discomfort grew when he noticed that the driver was deviating from the main routes, taking increasingly isolated back roads, where the snow covered any trace of passage. The car's GPS was turned off, and Pierre's cell phone still had no signal. The man drove with precision, avoiding fallen branches and potholes as if he knew every curve in the region. The tension rose when Pierre, looking in the rearview mirror, noticed bloodstains on the carpet of the back seat and a metal object, which looked like a knife, partially visible under the coat. The driver, noticing the restless look, smirked and locked the doors with a subtle click, as if to make it clear that Pierre had no choice. The silence became oppressive, broken only by the sound of tires cutting through the snow and the wind howling outside. Pierre tried to remain calm, making up a story about relatives waiting for him in the next town and mentioning that he had sent his location to friends. The driver showed no reaction, just sped along, swerving through intersections and ignoring road signs. At one point, the car came to an abrupt stop on a deserted road, surrounded by trees and without any lighting. The driver turned off the engine, slowly turned to Pierre and, with a cold look, said, "This is where you get off." Panic took over. Pierre tried to open the door, but it was locked. The driver pulled out his knife and advanced, but Pierre, in an act of pure desperation, managed to hit the attacker in the face with his elbow, creating an opening to escape through the passenger side. He ran through the snow, hearing the man's footsteps and heavy breathing close behind. The chase was brutal. Pierre stumbled, fell, and got up, guided only by the distant light of an isolated house. He reached the porch, knocked desperately on the door, and was answered by an elderly couple, who took him in and called the police. While they waited, Pierre told them what had happened, shivering with cold and fear. The couple said they had heard stories about a black car that roamed the area during storms, always associated with mysterious disappearances. The police arrived about half an hour later, but the driver of the black car had already disappeared, leaving only tracks in the snow and macabre remains inside the vehicle, which was found abandoned days later in a nearby forest. In the trunk were documents, personal belongings, and even photos of other victims, as well as tools used for restraint. The investigation revealed that the black car had been seen in several cities in the region, always associated with disappearances on stormy nights. Reports of similar encounters continued to emerge in the following years, but the driver was never identified. The case gained national attention, serving as a warning to solo travelers and drivers on rural roads during the winter. Pierre survived but never again drove at night in isolated areas. His story became a symbol of survival and caution, reminding us that behind a seemingly caring gesture, the worst of human predators can hide. The trauma left deep scars on Pierre. For months, he had recurring nightmares about the black car, waking up in a cold sweat when he remembered the metallic smell and the driver's blank stare. He avoided going out at night and refused any kind of ride, even from acquaintances. His experience was reported in newspapers and on TV shows, and Pierre began to participate in travel safety awareness campaigns, warning others about the dangers of blindly trusting strangers, especially in vulnerable situations. The story of the black car remains alive in the collective imagination of the region, fueling legends and warning about the real dangers of deserted roads. For Pierre, each snowfall brings back the fear of that night, and the certainty that, amid the silence and cold, danger may be lurking, ready to turn a ride into a desperate fight for life. 7. The disappearance at the border. Poland-Ukraine border, fall 2021. A group of 5 tourists, Anna, Mark, Elena, Tomasz, and David, decided to cross the border on foot, looking to save time and money while traveling through Eastern Europe. Their plan was simple: hitchhike from the Polish side to the first Ukrainian city, where they would spend the night before continuing on their journey. What seemed like a practical solution would soon turn into one of the scariest episodes ever recorded in the region. When they reached a seldom-traveled country road, they accepted a ride from a man driving an old, worn-out van with license plates partially covered in mud. The driver, a middle-aged man with a lined face and cold eyes, didn't say much, just said he would take them to the next town on the other side of the border. The atmosphere in the vehicle was tense, the silence broken only by the sound of the engine and the creaking of the seats. As they drove along, the road became increasingly isolated, surrounded by dense forests and abandoned fields, where the cold wind made the trees whisper dark secrets. The group tried to keep the conversation light, but the driver limited himself to dry answers. Anna noticed that the car's GPS was turned off and that the man avoided passing other vehicles. Elena, restless, commented on the desolate landscape, but the driver only accelerated, looking away in the rearview mirror. At one point, the van stopped in a remote clearing, surrounded by tall trees and thick fog that seemed to swallow everything around it. The driver said he needed to solve a problem quickly and asked the tourists to wait inside the vehicle. That's when the terror began. First, Elena went out to stretch her legs and never came back. The group waited, calling her name, but received no response. Minutes later, David was called to help the driver, and he also disappeared, leaving behind only a dirty sneaker and marks of struggle in the mud. Panic took over. Anna, Mark, and Tomasz tried to open the doors, but they were locked from the inside, and the locking system seemed to have been manipulated with precision. Tomasz searched the interior of the van for some tool or object that could help them, while strange sounds came from the forest and shadows moved between the trees, as if something or someone was watching them. Night fell, and the temperature plummeted. Fear turned to despair, and the silence inside the van was broken only by nervous sighs and the distant sound of branches breaking. Anna, with trembling hands, tried to use her cell phone to send messages for help, but the signal was non-existent. Their desperation increased when they heard heavy footsteps approaching the van, followed by a low, threatening voice whispering names, making everyone's hearts race. Their fear intensified when they realized the driver was no longer inside the van. The side door slowly opened, and a tall, imposing shadow appeared in the entrance, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. The man's voice echoed across the clearing, ordering them to remain still and not attempt to flee. The group, paralyzed by terror, felt the weight of the imminent threat. Time seemed to drag as the van remained silent, except for nervous sighs and the distant sound of the forest. Anna, feeling the weight of darkness and fear, began to observe every detail around her, looking for a chance to escape. She noticed that the driver had left the passenger side door ajar, perhaps out of carelessness or to provoke her. In the early hours of the morning, Anna managed to find a small ventilation window, partially hidden behind a dirty curtain. With great effort, using her nails and pieces of metal found on the floor, she managed to open a crack to the outside. She escaped by running through the forest, hearing the screams of her missing friends and the sound of the van's engine moving away, mixed with the howling of the wind. Her escape was marked by falls, branches cutting her skin, and the constant fear of being captured. After hours of exhausting walking, injured and almost without strength, Anna found a main road where she was rescued by a passing truck driver. She told her story, shivering with cold and fear, while the police were called to begin searching the area. Authorities found the van abandoned in the clearing, with signs of a struggle, bloodstains, and personal belongings scattered across the ground. The driver disappeared without a trace, and investigations revealed that he was a criminal wanted for kidnappings and disappearances in border areas, known for using isolated routes to capture his victims. The case gained international attention, serving as a warning to tourists about the dangers of accepting rides in remote and unknown areas. Anna survived, but never traveled again without taking extreme precautions. The trauma haunted her for years, with recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks, as she remembered the night she saw her friends disappear one by one. Her story was told in newspapers, documentaries, and lectures on travel safety, becoming a dark legend among backpackers and tourists crossing borders in Eastern Europe. The disappearance at the border remains a living warning. Even on seemingly safe routes, danger can lurk, waiting for the right moment to strike. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving deadly hitchhikers. So, which one scared you the most? Will any of them make you think twice before accepting or offering a ride? Tell us in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the darker side of the road and unexpected encounters, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more spine-chilling stories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take advantage of it now to subscribe and activate the bell.